Welcome back to the Flex Diet Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike T. Nelson. And today on the program, we've got Sam Miller. We're talking all about in-depth testing, blood work, and much more. So once you've got the basics down, what type of blood work should you look at? We discuss different types of testing also. And if you enjoy more advanced topics related to being more resilient, more anti-fragile, and you've got the basics down quite well, types of testing also. And if you enjoy more advanced topics related to being more resilient, more anti-fragile, and you've got the basics down quite well, you'll want to check out the Physiologic Flexibility Certification. Depending on when you're listening to this, it opens early September 2022. So the best way to find more information is to get onto the newsletter, the waitlist, which is at physiologicflexibility.com. There'll be a link in your favorite podcast viewer or player. You can go down there, put your email in, and you will get all the information about the upcoming release. And I normally have fast action bonus items for you also. If you're listening to this sometime after early September 2022, you can still go there and get placed on the waitlist for the next time that it opens. You'll also get lots of great information from me on the newsletter there also. So go to physiologicflexibility.com if you want to learn everything about cold water immersion, sauna and heat, high intensity interval training, different types of breath techniques, even keto diets and carbohydrates. It's all designed via the 4 pillars of the ability to regulate your system better, or these are sometimes called homeostatic adaptations. So homeostasis, your body's baseline. How can you stress your system a little bit to deviate away from baseline? And then how can you get back to baseline faster? We all know that different stressors are going to happen to you. And this, in my biased opinion, is the perfect way to add just a little bit more specific training each day to make your body more resilient so you can get back to baseline much faster. Go to physiologicflexibility.com. As I mentioned today in the program, Sam Miller, talking all about testing, everything from looking at fasted insulin, C-Peptide, some poo tests, and much more. So check out this conversation with Sam Miller. Hey, what's going on? Welcome back to the Flex Diet Podcast. I'm here today with Sam Miller. How's it going?
It's going good. Thanks for having me, Dr. Mike.
Good. And where are you coming at from? You're north of me, correct?
Yeah. So I'm in North Carolina.
Oh, North Carolina. So not so much. I just got that mixed up. I heard north and I was like, oh, it must be. No.
Yeah, I'm north. If you're in South Carolina, Georgia, or Florida, than that, I'm technically in the Southeast. So I've been here for this particular area a little over 10 years, but I came down to this area for undergraduate studies at Elon University and then made my way to Raleigh for NC State. So a combination of Carolina schools, and I do enjoy it here, but also a couple instances in my life, which would probably be too long of a life story for the podcast, got stuck here and I've been here ever since. Stuck here in a good way because I do enjoy it, but a few random sort of instances where maybe I was supposed to have an internship somewhere else and just super random stuff, like my car would get totaled or something. It's just like, oh, you're going to stay in North Carolina this summer. It's like, okay, got to get resourceful. We're going to figure this out. So I am still in North Carolina. I enjoy it, but been here since college and trained here for a period of time, did a lot of nutrition, corporate wellness, as well as online coaching, which really geographically doesn't so much matter where you are, but it's been home for me for a while now. So I'm south of you, I think. South of
definitely south of Minnesota.
North for some. And just enjoying right now it's not super humid, which is nice. I can get outside, get some extra steps in and stuff. But yeah, so I'm in Raleigh and really enjoy it here. But fortunately, was able to move online several years ago and pretty much been there ever since. So other than bouncing around for seminars, I'm pretty much just hanging out with the dogs at home.
Nice. And how far is Raleigh from the water? Do you get to escape to go play in the ocean for a while, or is this like testing my
Anywhere
geography
from,
and shows how bad it is?
yeah, probably like an hour and a half to 2.5, depending on where you want to go.
Oh, okay.
We're smack in the middle between mountains and beach, which is
Oh,
nice.
nice.
If you enjoy that mix of activities, you're a little bit landlocked in a way, but it's a quick escape to go either direction. So you can head to Boone or Asheville, Western North Carolina, or even Tennessee. We've obviously got some nice mountains and stuff with the Smokies, or you could head east and go towards the water. You've got Outer Banks, you go north, you got Virginia Beach, and then we've got a lot of great Carolina beaches as well. Or some people are brave and they will venture down to Myrtle.
Jeez.
A lot of folks from Midwest and even the Carolinas will go to Myrtle, but it's not too far. But if you do want to go a little bit further out, it might be 3 hours or so. But fortunately, we do have that advantage over the summer if you want to do that. So we were over in Top not too long ago. So it is a nice perk is being able to have both the mountains, the foliage in the fall, but then you also got the perks so you can escape the city and go more towards the beach or Outer Banks or something if you're into that.
Yeah, I've been kiteboarding there in the Outer Banks before, which is a very beautiful, fun area. I would recommend for sure.
For sure. If you're outdoorsy, there's a lot to do in the Carolinas.
Nice. And today's topic, we were going to talk about just the broad area of metabolic testing, which I know can cover all sorts of things. And yeah, so we'll get into the weeds on some of those because I'm sure your social media is worse than mine. It just appears that I'm constantly being assaulted by every new test known to man. And there's some pretty cool stuff coming out. And then there's some stuff where when I call the labs and I ask them like, hey, this sounds cool. What is it based on? And then they don't really ever get back to me or it's, it has a cool story, but you look at some of the published literature and you're like, oh, that's not really useful, but there's obviously a very role for it. Their testing's been around for a long time. So you can't just be like, I'm just not going to do any of it because then you're just being an idiot too. So how do you navigate the road between what is a new test that may be useful or it's just a company that may be trying to do the right thing, but they're just trying to cash in on something new and sexy?
Yeah. So when it comes to testing, I think we have to think first, okay, why are we testing? What are we testing for? And what purpose is it going to serve when we actually accumulate the data? Now, there's a separate conversation around, is that data actually accurate? And how can this benefit maybe our programming or protocol design? And I think that's an important question. So to start with the first portion, usually we look at testing when there's information in an intake form or something related to the client's goals where we maybe perceive that there's an obstacle of some kind and we want to navigate that, or we're looking to get a little bit more strategic and precise as it pertains to maybe someone's total daily energy expenditure or something that we're actually going to be impacted by when it comes to coaching the client transformation. On the other side, in terms of the actual accuracy of testing, that's a different conversation that we can move into a little bit later on. But I think first and foremost, you need to be thinking, okay, why would we test and what would the benefit be of having that testing information? And so first, when you're starting that client journey, especially from a nutritional perspective, I think it's imperative to first look at some of the basics. So things like keeping a food journal or basic food tracking and awareness around portion control, looking at biofeedback. How does this person actually feel? How's their performance? Are they engaging? Are they able to actually progressively overload their exercise or does their recovery suck? Looking at things like sleep and digestion and their stress levels, because using those things, we can begin to identify what tests might be valuable for that person. And if testing is even necessary, because for a lot of folks, that testing is going to be an additional sort of out-of-pocket expenditure and not something that's typically covered in their primary care physical or whatever they're getting from their doctor on a 6-month or annual basis. So first we need to consider what might be valuable to this person, and then what particular test fits the best based on potential signs or symptoms that they may be dealing with related to their transformation or even overall quality of life and health too.
So if we were to drill down into one of the components, you mentioned total daily energy expenditure. How would you start to wrap your arms around just that area, looking at calories in, calories out at a very simplistic level?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to looking at weight maintenance, because really what we're trying to achieve when we're looking at both food tracking, like a food journal, or if we were looking at someone through the lens of whether you want to use a Mifflin equation or different multipliers or various TDE calculators, the reason we do that, right, is to have an idea of, okay, where might this person fall in terms of maintenance calories? Now, there are certainly some flaws with all of those, and accuracy of tracking could be the complaint with the food journal. Calculators obviously have their own flaws in a sense. And I don't think you can really you're not going to be able to discern someone's diet history, health history, past eating styles and preferences, as well as exercise modalities, right? Whether you've been doing just cardio, do you resistance train, do you do a combination? So I think there's some flaws with them. And then on the testing side, Dr. Mike and I were talking about how our DM have this onslaught of various things, whether it's, oh, breathe into this device or pee on this card when we mail it to your house, and we're going to unlock all of these secrets about your metabolism. And unfortunately, that's just not really the case right now. Technology is not really there to where we've vetted those particular approaches. So I think if you were going to move down the testing front, we essentially just want to look at baseline function in terms of your overall physiological status quo and endocrine system. So things like thyroid health. I think a lot of people attribute, when they think about metabolism, they think about their body composition, how they feel, they think a lot about reproductive hormones, when in reality, while reproductive hormones do significantly impact your quality of life, when it comes to actual metabolic function, I think really we need to be paying a little bit more attention to things like thyroid, insulin, overall insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance, things like that, as well as some of our stress hormones and HPA axis function, things like cortisol, because that sort of fasted state energy metabolism, assuming you are on more of a conventional diet, you are probably going to be activating things like cortisol, glucagon, catecholamines at times to stabilize blood sugar. So if I'm just looking at an individual that comes in and maybe you're looking at an online coaching relationship, I think the most valuable place to start is a very thorough intake form, food journal. I would recommend 7 days, or if you're confined to 3 or 4, definitely get a few weekdays and a few weekends, because people eat differently on the weekends than they do during the week. From that food journal, ensure accuracy of tracking, have some conversations around that, teaching around macronutrition, or at least calories and protein. And then from that conversation, we can look at overall quality of life metrics, biofeedback, perceived stress, things that are impacting performance. And then if something's really seems to be bothering that person, or there seems to be some aberrations or deviations from their normal, then we could seek out some additional values. And I think as of right now, when it comes to some of those markers I mentioned, a lot of that is going to bring us back to serum labs, which has the most sort of clinical evidence and research behind it, most time tested. And when we look at various randomized control trials or systematic reviews that have been conducted, a lot of times what they're using to assess markers and changes and progress, various deviations, that's going to come back to serum labs. So as much as there are a lot of other tests out there, really, the exception to that might be, you could argue, for using like a salivary cortisol or urinary metabolites on the Dutch test can give you an adrenal profile. But when it comes to things like thyroid, we're still using serum labs. When it comes to things like insulin sensitivity, fasting insulin, A1C, glycomark, C-Peptide, fasting glucose, all of those are going to be blood-based markers. So I think that's where, both as coaches and consumers, we have to be savvy in terms of, there might be a lot of different ads you're seeing or stuff you're getting in your DMs about, oh, breathe into this device and we're going to completely assess your metabolism. And I don't really think that's super fair. And it doesn't really give you an appreciation for just how complex and amazing metabolism and human function actually is. And so I think there needs to be a little bit of kind of respect or homage paid to that, versus putting all your stock in one of these things that maybe you can grab off the internet.
Yeah. And even if you can, I'm a weirdo, right? So I have a full metabolic cart at my house that I can use to test people during exercise, or RMR, basal metabolism rate, whatever word you want to use. And even then, let's say you've got a several $1,000 piece of equipment and you can do highly accurate measurements. Meh. At best, I'm only getting part of the equation. I'm generally going to measure somebody at rest. I could do a VO2 max test. So I could measure them under max exercise, but that's not going to give me their entire total daily energy expenditure. So even when you have the most fancy equipment, you have to keep in mind, what is the context and what data are you actually grabbing? And like you said, a 7-day average, which is what I went to for just dietary recall. I use Chronometer. I don't make any money from them, but shout out to Chronometer.
I'm a big fan of Chronometer for sure, especially compared to the other options that are out there. We actually have an episode airing soon, specifically all about some of the advantages and micronutrient insights and different data that you're getting from Chronometer. Plus, their food database seems to have a little bit more of a verification process to it, whereas just about anybody can add a food, not to hate on some of the other macro trackers out there. There are a few big ones, but everybody's favorite, or the most prominent online, at least in the health coaching and macro tracking space, there tends to be significant amount of error when it comes to some of those food entries. And so clients are pulling that into their food journal, and it can lead to substantial deviations in terms of macro content, but also a lot of that's not going to have your micronutrition in there either. So then it's like a double whammy in terms of inaccuracies that can really cause some problems, especially if you're trying to be a little bit more strategic and high level with coaching.
Yeah, and that's what I ran into probably 4 or 5 years ago now. I had a series of clients like back to back. I was using another app and they're like, yeah, I don't know, I'm hitting all my protein, everything's great. And I'm like pulling my hair out going, why is like nothing working? This isn't making sense. And so one day I'm like, I'm just going to go look at every entry they have for the past 2 weeks. And so I'm looking at each one and I come across 2 ounces of chicken breast. 2 ounces. That seems low. They were hitting their protein totals. And I look over on the thing, it says 50 grams of protein. What? Wait a minute, this isn't even remotely close. And then you realize that someone had put an error when they entered, because you could enter a lot of your own foods into the database. The poor client doesn't know this. They're entering chicken breasts. They're getting whatever shows up. So they think they're hitting all their protein totals. And it turns out they were hitting at maybe a 30% of where we wanted them to. And that happened to me a couple times like that same week. And so I ended up just switching entirely and having the benefit of getting micronutrient profile and a whole bunch of other stuff. Just made my life so much better.
Yeah, definitely having those extra insights as a coach and the accuracy. And that's where, even with some of those other trackers, if you are getting the journal, not just the macronutrient totals, but if you have clients who are maybe switching over, I highly recommend there's an export feature on some of the most popular ones where you
Yep.
get that PDF export, have it either emailed to you or sent over to you in whatever software you use, and then really parse through that, because you'll notice right away, if you're familiar with portion sizes and tracking, some things will stand out to you right away in terms of red flags. Plus, I just think it's a good exercise, not just in terms of macronutrition, but you can also look in terms of food quality and choices that might be affecting appetite, satiety, blood sugar management between meals, also getting a little bit more insight from the client in terms of how they space their food intake throughout the day. So that really gives you more context for behavior. So I love that you brought up the word context earlier, because I think anytime we're talking about testing or macro trackers or any of these different tools that we use in transformation, if you don't understand the context for which you're applying these things, really don't have as much value. And that's why a lot of nutrition conversation becomes very nuanced to the particular person. But I'm glad you mentioned chronometer. Definitely glad you mentioned some of the variances that we see related to nutrition and how that can potentially show up. I know another potential variants too, and the reason we can't solely use those metabolic carts and different tools you mentioned is obviously non-exercise activity. Thermogenesis is such a big part of total daily energy expenditure, as well as potential exercise activity as well. And then, like you said, if they're eating, if they're tracking 2 ounces of protein, I think that's 50 grams of protein, and we're comparing that relative to their total daily energy expenditure. If you were actually eating 50 grams of protein from that chicken breast, your thermic effect of food is going to be significantly different than the 2 ounces as well. So lots of variables there to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I feel like every time I mention a newer app like Chronometer, I try to refrain from doing the back in my day, they just submitted it by handwriting and I had books I had to look through to look stuff up. Or I remember the first software I got was on a CD-ROM that was like $600 or something to do nutrient analysis of stuff. And you still had to type everything into it because I was the only person who had the license to it. And yeah, now it's quite a bit easier, but
I
I
use
just
Fitbit
gave my whole little old
back
man
in the day.
lecture.
Yeah, my old man lecture when I talk to clients is, so before we had all these trackers on your phone, you could either use like nutrition data, the website, and pull it
Mm,
and then put it in a spreadsheet, or back in the day, FitDay PC did have its heyday. So you would go into this online internet browser and you could pull certain foods and put them in there for your calorie and macro tracking.
yeah. Do you use daily weight at all and look at weight fluctuations over the 7 days? So what I've done is I'll use the equations to get a rough idea, but maybe it's because a lot of clients I have are just legitimate outliers. And then I'll compare that to a daily weight, get up, use the bathroom, get on a scale, just write it down. So I'll have their total calories for 7 days. I'll have their daily weight for 7 days. And then I look at that along with some of the equations to get, I think, a little bit more accurate idea, because as the equations all have a certain percentage of error,
Mhm.
and it's a compilation of this sort of fictitious average person. And yeah, it's going to get you in the ballpark, but on a N of 1, have you noticed some just kind of weird outline
For sure.
variations?
Yeah, I think you have to look at the food log relative to weight maintenance. And first of all, that also involves some client conversation around folks who maybe either have or have not been using the scale and people who have maybe a healthy or unhealthy relationship with the scale.
Yep.
But assuming somewhat we're going to go with kind of the avatar that is able to easily sort of transition into some of this metric based stuff. The 7-day food journal with an average of their weight across the week allows us to compare, okay, did we achieve weight maintenance at this calorie intake, assuming we had a conversation around accuracy of tracking? And then from that conversation, we might look at predicted TDEE. And usually, the more that that person's going to have a chronic dieting history, the more that that TDEE is going to be off, depending on their past behaviors. I talk about, and this is something that I reference in my book coming out later this year, is depth, duration, and frequency of past diets. So the deeper or steeper that you cut the calories, the longer duration that you follow that particular program, and the greater frequency at which you're maybe pursuing some of these fad diets or making significant cuts off of your nutritional intake, that's going to impact you when it comes to that current calculation that we're looking at. Because a lot of people on paper think, oh, this is my calorie burn, but they don't account for the fact that their diet history and their past choices, lifestyle factors, sleep, and health history really plays into that current energy expenditure, as well as making sure that we're keeping exercise fairly consistent. So when they are tracking that first 7 days in terms of food during the intake period, usually I'm not trying to make significant changes to program design because obviously that's going to impact energy expenditures. So usually we try to keep that the same and then transition towards, okay, here's the new program and intervention based on all of that track data. But I certainly agree that comparing food journal plus scale weight plus potential calculations can be very helpful. And then if they have anything that they can bring to me, any additional reports, any serum labs, things like that, I can begin to compare the 2 or 3 things and see what might be working and why it's working or why something's not working as a result of that based on their current sort of physiological function and how everything presents.
So serum labs for people who are listening, that would just be like getting blood work, right?
Yeah,
I mean, if
super,
you do.
super easy blood work. Or if you go to like Quest or LabCorp and they basically just do classic lab draw, that's what you're getting reported for you with serum.
And what would be a baseline that people should get? I'm sure you have this conversation more than I do, but unfortunately, not to pigeonhole dudes, but most of the time I'm like, hey man, like when's the last time you had any blood work? And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, do you even have a doctor? Do you know his or her name? No. I'm like, if you can't remember, then you're definitely overdue.
Right. Yeah, I think especially guys tend to avoid seeing the doctor. They tend to avoid getting some of that extra testing done. And it's either one of 2 things. It's either a no news is good news or kind of this state of blissful ignorance, or something is going on and they don't really feel right, but they're maybe either shy or embarrassed to have that conversation around things that maybe aren't as good. And either of those 3 scenarios are problematic because they basically lead to a lack of support, a lack of data and tracking. And I would encourage you, even if you do feel good right now, go get a baseline because 5 years from now, if you don't feel good, you're going to want to know what your markers looked like when you actually felt your best. So, regardless of whether you're in a place where we need to be doing some health monitoring for current interventions, or if we're just doing the testing to have a baseline so that 5 or 10 years from now or 20 years from now, we know, hey, this was something that evolved over time. And here's how we get back to you feeling your best. I think either way, testing is important. So if there are guys that are potentially not getting that done, would definitely encourage you to at least have some testing. Now,
And
in
what
terms
testing
of,
would be a baseline? Yeah.
yeah, even just have a baseline. And this applies to whether you're 25, 30, 35, 40, whether you're a young adult or you're currently a little bit more focused on anti-aging. Regardless of kind of your state throughout the lifespan, I still am a huge proponent of testing for a number of reasons, whether it's preventive or even if you are in a state where now it's become more reactive. I still think it's super important to have that testing done. Then in terms of the markers, because I know that was
Yeah.
something that we want to talk about. So when I think about just the base panel that a lot of people could benefit from, we definitely want to start with just CBC and CMP is our initial profile. So that stands for a blood count and a metabolic panel. So now your metabolic panel, contrary to how it sounds, while it does give you some baselines, it's not giving you the deeper data. So we do need to go beyond the CBC and CMP. Now, when it comes to The other tests we might want to consider, we talked a little bit about insulin sensitivity earlier. That would be things like in your CMP, you're going to have fasted blood glucose. We might want to go beyond that and get something like an A1C. We might also want to get fasting insulin. Those are going to be good markers for assessing, okay, how are we doing both in terms of our energy intake and overall energy availability? If energy intake or calories are in excess, and this could vary from person to person in terms of their intake, but if we're living sedentary lifestyle, standard American diet, we will move towards a place of insulin resistance, prediabetes, metabolic syndrome. And that's a huge problem that we have in the United States and Western world right now, really involves that sort of disease progression towards metabolic syndrome. Now, other markers we might want to consider would be things like our thyroid hormone. Most of the time, if you go to your primary care physician, they're only going to draw TSH. I really like to see TSH as well as free T3. If you can get TSH, free T4, and free T3, that's great because we see the communication between the brain and the thyroid itself, but also what's going on downstream from the thyroid gland production of thyroxine and then the conversion into free T3, which is actually what's acting the receptors. And basically just think of that as your metabolically active thyroid hormone. In addition to thyroid, we probably want to look at things like vitamin D, just because it is so important. It has so many different functions in the body. And so usually that's going to be a 25 hydroxy vitamin D. If you have a site or you're essentially pulling this, you'll usually see it as like vitamin D 25 HD or something like that. Most folks would benefit as much as I think there's an additional layer of data that we can pursue. A lipid panel is going to be a good choice, getting triglycerides, HDL, LDL, total cholesterol, maybe some ratios in there. Now, I think having the fasted insulin with a lipid panel, really to complete this picture of cardiometabolic health, it would be really nice to have something like C-reactive protein or some additional, more specific lipoprotein markers. But if affordability is one of the biggest concerns, take that fasting insulin and lipid panel, pair it with a C-reactive protein. That'll really help out in terms of giving us more context, because C-reactive protein is a marker for inflammation and can be used in combination with some of that other data around your metabolic health to assess long-term disease risk. And we'll see some changes there. So autoimmune clients and people who also have maybe other things going on, C-reactive protein can be off. Depending on the person's dietary preferences. So like for a vegan or vegetarian, I'm probably also going to want to look at more iron markers, things like ferritin, total iron binding capacity, serum iron. Those would give us a nice picture of what's going on from that particular micronutrients. So we can talk a little bit about dietary styles and deficiencies more, but I do think ferritin can be a good marker for people to pull. And then last but not least, we have our reproductive hormones. Both men and women should be pulling testosterone and free testosterone. Estradiol, also for men, yes, you need to check your estradiol because that can play a role in terms of sexual function and your overall mood and how you feel. And then SHBG, which is a binding protein, also tends to move with insulin resistance markers, interestingly enough. This can be valuable for both men and also explain some low T symptoms. Even if your total testosterone is normal, if your free testosterone is low, you may have elevated SHBG. And then for women, sometimes if we have low SHBG, this can influence PCOS symptoms and symptoms of high androgens. So very important for women as well. It can also be elevated with things like oral contraceptives, which then brings down our testosterone and impact our overall quality of life, sex drive, performance, things like that. So we certainly want to pay attention there. And then progesterone is how I would round out this triumvirate of reproductive hormones. Progesterone is very important for women from a fertility perspective. You'd measure it in the luteal phase of your menstrual cycle. And this is really more of an indicator of menstrual health than anything specific to our conversation earlier around like a lot of the metabolic factors. Is certainly very important for overall health and making sure that someone's cycling regularly. But once again, I think a lot of people sometimes put a ton of stock in the reproductive hormones, and then they're not paying attention to things like free T3, fasting insulin, C-reactive protein, or other important blood markers. They just get very caught up on reproductive hormones for whatever reason. I think just because they're in a lot of mainstream conversation. So super, super important for quality of life. And obviously testosterone can connect to that performance conversation and overall quality of life and how you feel about actually going to train. But we still need to look at these other markers as well.
I think you could argue based on the dietary info, which you would have, that even for guys who eat a fair amount of red meat, getting an iron panel is still good, because I've seen quite a few that have been very high, not just a little high, like crazy high, where you may consider donating blood.
Yeah, I think we'd probably look at that in combination if we had iron, ferritin, total iron binding capacity, and then you also had your CBC with hematocrit and
Yeah,
looking at
differential.
your red blood cell count. I think if you combine all of that, so if you were able to pull the hematocrit value, the iron value, ferritin, total iron binding capacity, and everything looks off, then maybe we approach that conversation. But I think sometimes people only pull like maybe a single value in
Yeah.
that conversation. And then that can be hard because sometimes with therapeutic phlebotomy or blood donation, people do donate blood to bring down that hematocrit or red blood cell count. And then they have issues actually bringing the iron up, believe it or not. So some people will actually do the blood donation to try to manage what's going on in their CBC and subsequently have a very hard time achieving balance with that too. I think it's important to look within the context of other markers. And there are certain medications that can influence that as well, like testosterone replacement therapy. So for folks who
Yeah.
are maybe concerned about that, obviously, if you've got controlled substances going on, you probably want to have a conversation with whoever's prescribing that for you, because they can also be involved in the therapeutic phlebotomy process too.
Yeah. Especially if you look at your HDL and it's, ooh, that's pretty damn low.
Yeah, I think when you have low HDL, I would definitely, just because that can happen with testosterone replacement therapy, it would make sense to get some additional values, right? So C-reactive
Yeah.
protein, I would look at APOB and LP little a, because those are the change that you're seeing in the shift in the lipid parameters. If you have good insulin sensitivity, good cardiometabolic health, inflammatory markers are controlled, you might want to just also be looking at things like someone who has a little bit lower HDL, if their triglycerides are super low, their CRP's super low, fasting insulin is well managed, and they don't have high risk from an APOB and LP(a) perspective, that's very different than someone who has low HDL, high triglycerides, high fasting insulin, high C-reactive protein, and those other markers are off. So we really need to make sure that, once again, this is the big C word of context related to clients and their overall health, because just because one particular marker goes one direction, if you don't have the context of understanding everything within their entire environment, as well as their nutritional intake and any medications that could be influencing things, you're really missing the full picture. So definitely, I would still look at the HDL marker for sure and understand there are certain things that may drive that up or down. But I would just make sure we're pulling that into a conversation related to some of the other considerations too.
Yeah. Cause I'm sure you get this question all the time where I had this literally the other day. Hey, my LDL is 211. Is that bad? I'm like, who are you? What are you doing? What are some of your other markers? Like I think almost human nature that we want to throw out one number and, oh, is that good or bad? So rarely can you tell from one number unless it's just astronomically high or astronomically low. Like you said, you have to look at the context of the data, where it comes from. And then I'm glad you mentioned metabolic health, because some of the parameters are based on general population, and general population a lot of times is not the most metabolically healthy population either. So you have to account for that context also.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's some pretty generous reference ranges. And as you mentioned, unhealthy population as the basis for our Western lab values. And so, whether it is common testing that you would get done at a Quest or LabCorp, what we see is what might be low or what might be high or what might be deemed as normal is not necessarily what's best for you or where that particular person feels their best. Now, lab readings are still super important and play an overall role in terms of looking at your sort of complete picture of your health and getting a really nice indication of your physiological status quo. And that's why looking at labs can be a really helpful sort of data set and a helpful tool when it comes to your transformation. But a lot of people do put too much stock in maybe one particular value without the context of other values, or they're looking at, oh, this is high or this is low, or in like the cholesterol conversation come up, it's a lot of somewhat antiquated information without the context of the new information that we have. There's been systematic reviews on dietary cholesterol and the actual marker of LDL as recently as 2021, where there was a significant change, and the actual comorbidity data and longevity data was actually higher than some of the reference range markers that you would see on a standard panel. And so the standard panels are this aggregate and averages of information from a Western population over time, versus we have this new information and new research that comes out. And that's why it's important to keep up with journals and nutritional publications and the different information we have if you are a coach or health practitioner, because that's how you're best able to serve individuals. And we know that I think any generation beyond sort of our bracket of coaches and clients that we work with, we definitely see where people saw in the mainstream media things like cholesterol or dietary fat being demonized for such a long period of time. Now, I'm not going out and saying, hey, go change your macros and chronometer to go have 90% of your calories come from dietary fat. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think we went from kind of we go from extreme to extreme rather than having an intelligent conversation around maybe a slight change in dietary intake and the values that we're actually looking for. And I think LDL is a great example of that. And we just have better tools now. We have things like LPA, ApoB, CRP, which sounds like alphabet soup. But essentially, if you guys are interested in that, I actually did post a specific podcast more related to cardiovascular health and cholesterol. But really, once again, we're thinking about inflammation, we're thinking about insulin resistance, we're thinking about the lipid profile, which is what these little cholesterol markers are essentially what we're looking at. And then we can just get more specific in terms of those cholesterol markers. And places like Quest have NMR is basically a lipo profile. And then the LPA and ApoB, so that's lipoprotein A is what they would be measuring there in terms of overall risk. So if it's something you're concerned about, it's in your family history, I would just encourage you to get more specific testing and then also working with someone who actually understands those ranges as opposed to just being fearful of one particular marker being high or low. And even what you've eaten recently, fasting, exercise. I've seen people who train the day before they go get labs and then they think their liver is failing when in
My
reality,
kidneys are bad.
yeah, it's like liver and kidney markers are way off. And I'm like, did you train really intensely and are you dehydrated? And they're like, I did have a pretty tough work. I trained legs yesterday and actually set 3 PRs, went to failure on 4 exercises. I'm like, okay, let's actually retest a few of these because that's going to significantly skew some of those values too.
And you mentioned insulin, which I 100% agree with. I did a study years ago and unfortunately never got published, which is a whole nother story. But we were looking at borderline type 2 diabetics during exercise. They were coming to the lab. They were doing exercise. We had live blood draws on fasting glucose and insulin, send all this stuff out. So the data I got back first was just on insulin. And I just got back glucose. So you're looking at them, you're like, oh, that person's high, that person's low. I'm like, okay, yeah. And about a week later, you get the insulin data. And it was fascinating to see both of them, again, in a population who's borderline diabetic. The insulin was sky high in some people whose blood glucose was high, but not as crazy high as some of the other people. And then it was just fascinating to see that if you only looked at the blood glucose, you'd be like, yeah, you're high, but yeah, you're not as bad as Bob over here at 155. But that person's insulin was just sky high. So their body was compensating for it by just whacking out a shit ton of insulin. And you can easily argue then once you look at both those numbers that, oh yeah, that person is headed down the poor metabolic health pathway right away. And then you had also mentioned C-Peptide. Any thoughts on when you would use fasting insulin versus a C-Peptide, which is more like a 24-hour-ish marker of insulin?
Yeah, I think right now, so in sort of the Western approach, right, you're most likely to see fasted glucose and A1C. I think if you get lucky, you might be able to have fasted glucose, A1C, and fasting insulin. And from an affordability perspective, that's a really nice 3 musketeers of insulin sensitivity, if you will. Beyond that, there are some more novel markers, things like glycomark, C-Peptide, et cetera. But a lot of those do tend to be a little bit more expensive. And we try to be cognizant of cost when it comes to testing. And also, what do we have the most data on in terms of an accuracy perspective and really creating that full picture? And so when we have fasted blood glucose, we're able to see what's going on in terms of blood sugar in the actual serum. When we have fasting insulin, we can assess, okay, what is the pancreas actually pumping out to resolve or manage that particular glucose value? And then A1C, we have this somewhat long-term look at that in the full sort of acronym or label there would be HbA1c. And so with those 3, you're really able to get a nice picture. I would say you see C-Peptide a lot less frequently on panels. Same thing, glycomark a lot less frequently. I know Dr. Serrano really likes glycomark and he uses the old adage like, you eat a banana, I eat a banana. It's not the same thing. And so we have to think about that.
You have to do it in the Serrano accent.
What?
I said you have to do it in
I don't really have a good Serrano accent. I don't know
need
that
to put on a
anyone does
Hawaiian
good Serrano accent, but I knew it wouldn't be my accent. That's for sure. So just had a little change in tone, but overall what we need to understand is we may eat particular foods and have differing glucose responses. Also, even in a fasted state, we may have completely different readings and profiles from an insulin sensitivity perspective in terms of glucose. Then you have a dawn response consideration that would be worth paying attention to with particular folks. But just to keep it simple for a lot of people, I think glucose and fasting insulin are your cornerstone metrics, but in Western medicine, you're far more likely to see fasting glucose and A1C, especially if your PCP, your primary care physician, has a little bit more concern around prediabetes or maybe a family history where there's some cardiometabolic health concerns. But I personally, I really like fasting insulin, but I think it's important to not look at it in a vacuum. Ideally, you would have multiple data points plotted over time versus just looking at one particular reading on one particular day.
What are your thoughts on the lower end of quote unquote acceptable for testosterone levels, especially for males? To me, it appears like blood levels of testosterone now are becoming like the bench press number for all labs. That there's this assumption that if I take my testosterone from 500 to 800, that's just going to be amazing. I'm going to feel completely different. But not all physiology is quite that simple and linear.
Yeah, so there's a lot of other considerations besides total testosterone. I think the example provided was, okay, total testosterone went from 500 to 800. We have to also think, what is the percent aromatization of testosterone and estradiol? So estradiol, or E2, is also an important marker on a men's health panel. And then in addition to testosterone and estradiol, we have to look at free testosterone and sex hormone binding globulin. So free testosterone can significantly impact your biofeedback, quality of life, energy levels, libido, cognition, a lot of really important stuff there. So even if you took your total testosterone up by a few hundred points, if we didn't really see a huge movement in the free testosterone, or you're aromatizing a disproportionate amount of that total testosterone, or your sex hormone binding globulin climbs significantly, or other markers in your lab panel are off, that's going to impact whether you feel better. Now, certainly we would like to see a little bit of a percentage increase there, or a lot of guys do want more total and free testosterone, but it's not as simple as just, okay, I ratcheted this up by 100 points or 200 points, and now I'm golden from a health perspective. There's just a lot more that we need to take into account, both in terms of biofeedback and quality of life symptoms, as well as other helpful markers in the context of looking at that particular reproductive hormone indicator.
So more advanced testing. So they've gone in, they've got some of the basic stuff. What other testing would you use, both from blood testing, and are there any other, I guess, more, lack of a better word, functional tests you would do? Do you do any surrogate assessment of aerobic base, VO2 max, or what are some other things you look for?
Yeah, so I don't have a ton of access to certain, a little bit more advanced on the exercise physiology lab side. And a lot of the folks that are presenting in terms of the population that we work with tend to either have some abnormalities in terms of endocrine function, or there's some GI distress and digestive health issues. And so that sometimes leads us down a rabbit hole of other testing considerations. I would say my preference in order, if we were looking at a population, is ideally we just start with some really good coaching conversation, intake forms, biofeedback, food journal, and looking at your exercise program. Now, the layer beyond that, maybe we're doing some more advanced biofeedback or more of a health appraisal, more significant in-depth intake form from there. Then beyond that conversation, we're probably looking at serum labs, because that gives us a really great picture of health. And beyond some of the markers that we talked about in our baseline panel, maybe based on their situation, we're pulling a couple extra markers there. Someone who's maybe really interested in performance or longevity and other considerations. Really just depends on what their goals are, or maybe they have more physique and aesthetic related goals that's going to influence it. But I think then we reach a fork in the road, and depending on their state in life, my answer for testing might vary between maybe a menopausal female or someone who's a younger individual who's 27 years old, but having pretty significant GI issues. I think that's going to bring you down a different path. But the issue with some of those is what's become commercially available versus where the research is. We don't necessarily have a research and evidence base to support every single one of these new tests. And some of them, what's being used in the research or what might be available in a lab, is slightly different than what's commercially available. So maybe there's researchers in Norway who are using 18 PCR for GI testing, and maybe what's commercially available is a 16 PCR. So it's like it's close, but it's not quite the same. And then there's other considerations on the hormone side. A lot of people have gotten very interested in the actual metabolites of hormones. So instead of serum labs, they might be looking at something like a Dutch test, because they want to look at enzymatic activity. Now, that could be helpful if someone has very specific symptoms, or you're dealing with a case that's maybe female with PCOS or the perimenopausal situation that I mentioned earlier. But those kind of bring us down very different rabbit holes. I think if you're working more with athletes or someone who's trying to achieve next level sort of performance and they're a relatively healthy population, then sure, probably coming back to more of that, maybe it's VO2, or maybe you're looking at other metrics of output or other testing that you can deploy. But in terms of a lot of the populations that I've been dealt, I guess you could say, or come into contact with over the years, usually it's that progression of client conversation, data documentation, and then moving into from there, maybe some other testing, of which like serum labs is definitely more that paramount sort of gold standard in terms of what research and evidence we have. And then depending on the goal, you might branch off in a bunch of different directions for more specific or nuanced testing methods for the client.
Yeah, I remember conversation I was next to years ago at PaleoFX. My buddy Dr. Ben House was presenting there, and someone grabbed him after his talk and was asking him, they're like, "Hey, I heard there's this new Dutch test. I need to do this." And he's like, "Okay, what's your training?" It's like, "I don't train." It's like, "How many hours of sleep do you get a night?" It's like, "Oh, maybe 6. Do you log your food?" He's like, "No." He's like, "Just start there. Save your $600. He's like, "Oh, but I really want this test." He's like, "Sure, you can get a test, but
Right.
it's not going to be the most helpful thing. You just take that money and hire a trainer for a couple of days to show you how to exercise. Like you're going to get way more bang for your buck." So it's not to say that testing isn't valuable, but I like what you're talking about in terms of
Yeah, I think
context.
we have to we're situationally pro testing. So let's say someone is, so I think where the conversation is different is instead of that beginner client, a lot of us encounter clients where we're not their first coach. And then because we're not their first coach, it's probably not their first diet. And it's also not their first exercise program. And they've also got maybe a history of lifestyle stress. And maybe they are trying to sleep as best they can, but there's some other factors or variables. Maybe it's they have younger children in the household, or maybe there's night shift work. And because of their occupation, they can't necessarily change that schedule entirely. So they're doing the best they can with what they have where they are. And now for that client, it can be valuable to deploy testing to make the most of their situation. If their circumstances can't necessarily immediately change, we have to look at what toggles can we deploy from a nutrition and supplement perspective and a training perspective to get that person the best possible results or quality of life improvements with where they're at. So let's say a female who's working night shift, maybe she's followed a number of diets over the years, maybe slightly higher training intensity for a period of time. And maybe she's noticing some less than favorable symptoms in terms of maybe higher androgens or unwanted hair growth, potentially acne, irregular cycles. Maybe she's trying to get her fertility in line. That's where I think some of these additional testing things can come into play, or just maybe discomfort from later luteal phase perspective and overall health, maybe struggling with fat loss goals and performance. I think the testing can be paired with an intelligent conversation around biofeedback, around your food journal, around your exercise habits. And there's definitely some clients who are deserving of advanced protocols. Like I've definitely heard there's a lot of folks where it's earn your advanced protocols. And I think that's true to an extent, but there's also people who are putting forth deliberate effort, who I think the word deserve is really a loaded term, but I think there are folks who are really giving like a commendable effort in their transformation. They're trying with their nutrition, they're tracking their food, they're implementing practices that have been recommended to them by the health and fitness industry. And unfortunately, if they end up in the wrong bubble of the internet and they're maybe following some sort of fad diet of some kind, or very calorie restricted program that's not best for them, no seasonality or periodization to their programming, they can end up down this really unfavorable hole of issues very quickly from a hormonal and metabolic perspective. And that's where I think testing can be deployed to help someone who doesn't really have an effort problem or doesn't really have a basic foundational like health hygiene issue, versus the guy at Paleo FX. It's yeah, get more sleep, and maybe you need to increase your protein. Maybe he's eating like 80 grams of protein per day and he weighs 175 pounds. Cool. Let's bring that up to 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. Let's get you moving. Let's get you sleeping a little bit better. Maybe some stress management practices. We're never going to skip over, I talk about foundational 5 of like sleep, sunlight and steps, strength training, strategic nutrition, and like a bonus one could be supplementation there. But there are clients who are really doing their due diligence in some of those categories, or they've just been unfortunately misled by folks who maybe think that their program is the solution for their problems. And unfortunately, it puts them in the wrong direction or doesn't move them towards their goals. So I think what's the sign of a very sort of powerful professional from a health perspective. And when it comes to health and fitness conversation is we're deploying the right tools at the right time for the right person. And we're not like against using particular approaches. And you can be somewhat nutritionally agnostic. You can be understand, hey, maybe I use serum labs for this, or maybe I'm going to go talk to Dr. Mike and we're going to go get like a BMR assessment or something for this. And understanding that these are all things that can fit in your tool belt and be used intelligently depending on the person, but it doesn't override the fact that you need to actually talk to them about their lifestyle and actually talk to them about some of those things like Ben mentioned, which I think is really important. So I'm glad you brought that up, but I think also we need to think about the client avatar or the actual person that's maybe deploying this, because you'll know very quickly if it's going one way or the other. And I think it help give people a more clear answer, because there are definitely a lot of people who are very frustrated, who are, I think they're following a plan and they're putting forth pretty significant effort. At least a lot of the clients I've seen over the years, 60-70% of them, their perceived effort is fairly high and they're training quite a bit and they think they're doing the right thing from a nutrition perspective, but it's just not steering them in the right direction relative to their goals. So I definitely have a lot of empathy for those people.
Yeah, no, and I agree 100% because you know that after just the first call, because like we talked about at the start, you're going to go through all those questions of, so I think of it as physiology is almost a black box. What was your input? What was your output? Oh, you're training hard 5 days a week. Oh, you're eating this much. Oh, and you're getting that result. That's weird. That doesn't that doesn't add up, right?
Yeah.
So then you're like, oh, how's your sleep? How's your recovery? And then it's like peeling that onion. So in my case, I would look at what's your resting heart rate? What's your VO2 max? What's your heart rate variability? Is your stress
I'm glad you
becoming
mentioned those other two because
super high
come up in our
for,
conversation.
yeah, for the effort you're putting in? And sometimes I've seen people go the reverse direction. They're putting all this effort and their HRV is actually paradoxically too good. So they're parasympathetically overreached and they're like, yeah, I just feel like shit all the time. So you're looking for those disparities between what's coming in and what's coming out on the other side.
Yeah, I love that you brought up resting heart rate and HRV, both from a stress and nervous system balance perspective. I think that's something that fits nicely with the conversation that we've had so far today. And the black box is a great way to think about it. And that it's almost like this dissonance of inputs and outputs. And when a client's not getting the results that they're looking for, I think this kind of ties it back to the very beginning of our conversation, Dr. Mike, where it was like the problem solving component. We were talking about being in a gym and life as a trainer versus on being online and content creation and the folks that maybe reach out to us. And really that black box and looking at the inputs and outputs, it comes back to problem solving. And when things don't add up, I think that's where your more intermediate to advanced coaching really comes into play is, okay, cool. Let's sit down together. Let's have a conversation. Let's look at the inputs and outputs and let's figure it out. And then, yeah, maybe we pull some of this extra data. Maybe Dr. Mike has your resting heart rate and your HRV, or maybe we also notice that something's a little bit skewed in the labs. And then we come together with all that information and we just try to advance and move the protocol forward with some incremental improvements based on tools we have. That really tied it together nicely.
Yeah, and as we're wrapping up here, two last questions. I'm glad you mentioned the GI testing because that's one area I see more and more very, I'll say, interesting claims from some companies who shall remain nameless that, hey, if you just do our test, oh, it tells you, oh, you need 63 more milligrams of spinach and you need blueberries at 43 milligrams more per day. It's like this highly specific outcome, which I don't trust at all. And then again, that's not to say there's not good testing in that area. And even like what we were just talking about too, in my case, it's like someone has massive GI stuff. I've done all the basic stuff we can do and something's still going on. Then I'll refer them to someone like you or Dr. Ruscio or other people I know to be like, hey, like get this figured out and we'll work together at the same time. But I think it's hard for consumers because they're promised by just this one test they're going to magically get all these answers, and then they do it and then it doesn't work, and then they feel even more frustrated, and it's just this more of a, they're on the downward spiral at that point.
Yeah. So starting with the GI test consideration, I think we have to be able to look at the difference between maybe raw data that comes from a report, depending on the type of test actually used, and then moving beyond that raw data to recommendations or protocol printouts, so to say, that are created by some of these testing companies. And I don't think we're at the point with the technology yet where you can reliably use those tests for specific nutrition and supplement recommendations. I think if you have a more accurate, better quality test or assay of your particular health metrics. So when it comes to GI health, I think you do need someone who's able to look at raw data and then from there make some assessments about pattern. I really think we're only at the point with those tests where you can look at patterns and trends and then make interventions that maybe address those patterns or trends or try to move against maybe something that's moving in the wrong direction. So if you're seeing dysbiosis and there's more opportunistic bacteria relative to commensal bacteria, it's okay. We don't yet have the ability to go in and like sniper rifle one particular strain of bacteria. That's not realistic. And I think that's very misleading. Same thing with very particular dietary protocols and supplement protocols based off of that testing. I think we still need to look at the person's individual N of one response and also what food log did they have coming in. And we'll remember with these GI tests, your environment, what you ate the day before and the week before, the supplements that you're taking, you literally change any of those particular things, you're going to change your GI test results. At least if it's a good test and it's fairly specific and accurate, you change your behaviors, you change your food, you change your supplementation, that's going to influence your test results. So I'm not a huge fan, like you said, if there's anything that's telling you, hey, eat 53 milligrams of spinach, or you need to increase your blueberry consumption by 2/3 of a cup. We're not at the point where we have those precise capabilities yet. I'm a much more of a proponent of looking for trends and patterns and going back. And even most of the time, I do think it's like the savvy practitioner can use a combination of the food log, potentially looking at common irritants and doing some basic food removal, rotation, or replacement, see how someone responds to that with some very basic supplementation. Maybe try that out for 2 to 4 weeks, and the person might make some great progress. We also need to look at attentive eating practices, chewing, maybe doing a postprandial walk, which is great not only for digestion, but actually really great for glycemic control, which we were talking about earlier in the podcast. Now, if I've deployed now the key is that someone with a little bit more intermediate to advanced knowledge of GI health, digestion, nutrition, they know the right foods to substitute, remove, replace, and rotate. There are a lot of folks who are just going to take a stab at it in a shot in dark, and that can lead to more problematic symptoms, or you don't really have a strategy. You're just randomly guessing, and that's not very good for the person who's following the protocol that you've designed. So I would encourage you to have some additional education around how certain foods impact someone's specific GI symptoms. From the foods and supplementation, you deploy some certain strategies from a lifestyle perspective, maybe reduce training intensity, leave some more reps in reserve. From there, if things begin to improve and clear up over 2 to 4 weeks, we can ride it out for a little bit. I think if you want an additional layer of data and we're not really worried about the discretionary spend that would be going towards some of these GI testing, I think you can do it for some additional information, but it doesn't have to be the sole thing that you do. And one of the things that I've seen both with practitioners and with clients is the data is helpful from an adherence perspective. So someone
Yeah.
sees that they're improving from a trend analysis. So for those of you who can't see us on video, like if I'm making these somewhat linear improvements or a little bit up and down in terms of dysbiosis or permeability or whatever they're claiming to measure on the test, the gamification of that does help with client adherence and looking at the protocol as being somewhat efficacious, and they get more buy-in into why they're actually doing what they're doing. Because one of the biggest challenges with the GI protocol is, oh, wait, I got to remove these foods for how long and not supposed to have alcohol or do this, or I need to remember to take this supplement. So having that sort of quantifiable information on paper sometimes just helps from a client sort of mental approach, mindset, and perception of what they're participating in. And then over time, you can follow up and track it. But that is one of the unmentioned tools that I don't really see people talking about, is what happens from like the client's actual psyche. But I do think we have a lot of great tools to leverage that are at our disposal that we could use before you have to go spend $200, $300, $400 on a test. And I would say just completely outright, do not, if someone's doing something like a stool culture and giving you recommendations on food and supplementation, just run away the other direction. You'd be much better off with, there's other more novel testing methods that will probably change by the time some folks listen to this podcast, like 6 months or a year from now. So I'll just say generally at this point, we've we've moved beyond that culture towards more either PCR or other analysis sort of methods. And I'm sure we'll have more in the years to come because the microbiome is such a hot topic right now. But generally steer clear of those specific recommendations, look more at the trends, and definitely still don't ditch your food journal, and still look at things like a Bristol stool chart and symptom tracking, as well as like stress plays a huge role in digestion, sleep as well. And then little things like leveraging some post meal walks, chew your food, maybe turn off the TV, go sit down, have your meal. All of those things can go a really long way to improving your digestive health.
Yeah. A buddy of mine who remained nameless did one of these tests, and he's like, wow, what do you think of the accuracy of this is? And so I pinged like Ruscio, another friend of mine, Dr. Sarah, who's been on here, that do a lot of gut health stuff. And they kind of had the same general agreement. I texted him back. I'm like, you can probably crap on a piece of paper and read it like a Rorschach test, and you're probably going to be more accurate than what this thing is going to tell you. And then I wrote, P.S. I hope it says you should be a vegan, because he like loves eating red meat all the time. He's like, oh, well, if it says that, I'm definitely not going to do it.
Yeah.
Which
I
I
think in
thought
the grand scheme of
was
things,
funny.
I have seen Dr. Ruscio probably use maybe one or two or three of the main ones that are out there. So I do want to make it
Yeah.
clear for the audience, I'm not totally anti, but there's
Oh,
probably,
no.
to put it in perspective, I think what Dr. Mike is getting at, because my audience might be a little bit different than Dr. Mike's, is let's say there's 17 or 18 different companies out there marketing, and there's probably more, only maybe 5 to 10%, definitely less than 20. So less than a quarter of the brands that are pushing these tests commercially are actually using the appropriate methodology and are non-specific in their recommendations, meaning they do give you data, but they don't say, hey, eat this way, supplement this way. They allow a practitioner to work with you to figure out what's best for you. I do generally see that moving in a positive direction, and I'm okay with that. I think that's the future of where things are going. I think where Dr. Mike and I agree are using a less novel, less tested, less accurate method. Maybe they're like only using stool culture or something, like the pooping on a piece of paper, like he said. And then from there, they're trying to give you these hyper precise recommendations of eat 2 slices of watermelon on Tuesday and then come back and do another test. I think that's really what we're getting at for the audience who's less familiar with that industry, and without naming particular brands, because we're not really trying to pick on anyone per se. But this is where it's important to have someone who maybe knows the differences between the tests, when to use them, when not to use them, and then also how to use them, which I think has been the key focal point in our conversation today.
Yeah, and to reiterate the last part you had too, is that I do some blood spot testing for omega-3s, EPA, DHA, lipids, and I'll tell clients outright, I'm like, hey, I'll pay for your other test. We're going to rerun it in 8 weeks. And I'm basically doing that so they take their fish oil. So I'm telling them ahead of time, hey, here's this thing. Here's your baseline. Here's a recommendation of a general direction you should go in. Oh, and then by the way, within this period of time, we're going to retest you and see how you're doing. Because if you want to try to ensure compliance, like you were talking about, especially with more difficult dietary restrictions or things they can do, I think part of, especially one-on-one or online or in person, is the accountability factor. And yeah, I'm probably primarily just doing that more for accountability than anything else. And if it gets them to do it, then I'm okay with that.
Yeah. And in some instances, maybe we're following that up with other more specific markers too.
Sure.
But I do think the convenience of some of the at-home stuff is promising, and you can get clients to buy into that a little bit more. And really, this just becomes a conversation around client enrollment and seeing what your client is willing to do. And depending on the significance of the problem that they have, they're probably willing to take additional measures to solve that problem because that's important to them and what's top of mind. So I do definitely like the tool of using it as a little bit of tracking and accountability, but also future pacing. Hey, our goal is to be consistent with this so we can improve your result next time. And it does create, or maybe bring us back to a little bit less amorphous world that I think we can end up in sometimes, especially with the more advanced health concepts, things that move beyond adding a rep or two to your bench press or a push up. When we're actually looking at some of these other elements, it can be hard for people to have actual quantitative stuff to look at versus just the subjective feelings of well-being. And I think if we can combine those conversations with some of the testing, we can really end up in a little bit more harmonious place with those clients and hopefully help them on their way to getting better results in their transformation.
Awesome. And last question, for more advanced testing or new things that are coming out that look like they're promising, but may not have the best data yet. Are there anything in particular that's new on the horizon that you're excited about?
So I've heard a couple podcasts in regard to the whole like 16, 18 PCR shift. There's a couple new, I get into the cardiovascular stuff sometimes because of my family history. My dad actually recently had some follow-up procedures based on some complications he's had for a number of years. So I've been down those CBD rabbit holes. And so different things going beyond like Boston Heart, Cleveland Heart. And there's a new one that the name is escaping me right now that I think is pretty interesting. On the GI side, I think commercially we might be a few years out from like another intervention, or excuse me, another testing method or tool that will have beyond some of the PCR tests that are out right now. So that might be a little bit. So I don't necessarily have one that's top of mind. And I've been more down a little bit of cardiovascular rabbit hole lately just because my dad recently had a follow-up stent. So that's a little bit of my free time
Okay.
going
Sure.
that direction. He's all good, but it's
Oh,
been
good.
a little bit of a process for him. So I just try to watch it both for myself and my other family members so that we're getting the appropriate testing to look at it preventatively over the horizon. But on the GI side, I think there's, I don't know if it's a GA or I see the problem is like the names in research can be very particular relative to what's actually coming out
Right.
commercially. I believe there's two researchers in Norway who are working on making sort of an incremental improvement to the commercially available 16 PCR that is currently out for GI. That seems intriguing. The Boston Heart and Cleveland profiles, I do believe. So Dr. Twyman would be a good person to talk to on the CBD front. We just had him in for an interview for some of our students in FNMS. He talked about some additional markers going beyond sort of NMR, LPA, and ApoB, and going beyond that calcium score, looking at more soft plaque and some other things that we can pay attention to. So I've had my nose down that rabbit hole for a little bit and haven't heard too much as far as advances going beyond like Dutch test. And then periodically we will get some new serum lab tools. But as of right now, I'm just playing around with different inflammatory markers that we've had, but seeing what they might mean for different autoimmune cases and things like that, and potential sort of relationships or correlations there. And I'd say probably, I guess one that's still newer within the last 10 years or so is Glycomark, but just from a cost perspective, sometimes it's just better for clients to get fasting insulin and some other things. So I don't have anything that's got me super, super excited, but we've been emailing even about a few studies,
Oh, yeah.
collagen conversation recently. So I can always ping you if I see something that looks extra good.
Yeah. And super quick follow-up on that. Do you do any measurements with flow-mediated dilation as maybe a surrogate marker for vessel health in terms of the ability of the vessel to dilate when it should for cardiovascular
I
risk?
haven't yet. I would definitely be interested in that for sure. I haven't personally had that done, but a lot of these testing methods that we talked about, usually my go-to is if I hear about it, I'll either test on myself or do some self-experimentation, or I have maybe some former clients who are always super interested in this type of stuff where they're planning on doing something like that. And then we'll look at it and see, okay, how does this compare to some of the stuff we looked at before? Does this make sense relative to the other lifestyle and nutrition factors? But no, the blood vessel component seems super interesting because I think that would give some helpful insights as well. I recently, for the first time, so I'm 33, just had a calcium score done and did some more advanced like lipid profile metrics and some other things this year. So that was my quote unquote like self-experimentation adventure for Q2, and would probably do some follow-ups next year and just continue to accumulate data over time. But that's all that's been on the horizon for me right now. I've been between business owner and full-time dog dad, keeping me busy.
Yeah, last plug, obviously VO2 max and cardiovascular health is a huge component in there too for people listening, obviously.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Checking that out.
Cool. And thank you so much for all your time today. I really appreciate it. And I know you've got a podcast, a newsletter, you've got a bunch of courses. So tell us a little bit more about what you got going on.
Yeah, of course. So on social media and website, everything's just going to be Sam Miller Science for the most part. So the podcast is Sam Miller Science. I'm on Instagram as Sam Miller Science. Sometimes I will occasionally throw up a TikTok video, but it's not really where I hang out the most.
Are you dancing on TikTok? Anything cool
dancing, there? No dancing right now. I will sometimes find some funny sounds and try to connect it back to nutrition and training, but as of right now, mostly I live in the educational content realm, occasionally crack some jokes, but tend to spend the most time with podcast, Instagram, and then my newsletter, which you can access through any either social media channel or sammillerscience.com. We have a number of different free resources. So if you elect to grab any of the free resources, workshops, or different downloads, that'll basically bring you into the email ecosystem where I'll send out more kind of little nuggets and research and podcasts and things like that. And then outside of that free content that we have in terms of the Sam Miller Science platform, my main program for health professionals, so fitness coaches, health coaches, people looking to get more into nutrition, advanced nutrition, the intersection between some of the things we talked about today, like the endocrine system, hormones, metabolism, gut health, and actually doing it in a way that combines a little bit of the research and evidence with the common sense and the clinical practice and tying that all together versus just going to one extreme or the other. That's the functional nutrition and metabolism specialization. I think what we really pride ourselves on is taking actual case studies and client experience and then still sticking to, we're not in this far-fetched sort of woo like incense world where we think that supplements and magical thoughts are going to be the solution to all your woes. There's still conversation around things like energy balance, your food log, your exercise, resistance training, walking, things that have substantial amounts of evidence, but then combining that with some more novel things and maybe more advanced testing methods, protocols, strategies, and integrating some of the serum lab stuff that we talked about today. And then really creating a little bit more value for the clients in the conversations we're having. So that's FNMS, the functional nutrition and metabolism specialization. And I think actually that's how we got linked up. Dr. Mike is through one of our students. And then you can learn more about that at www.metabolismschool.com. And yeah, you can just go like scroll and see if that's something you'd be interested in. But I always recommend people start with just the no cost content because we've got probably close to 400 podcasts by the time this comes out. So there's plenty to sink your teeth into. And I'd always rather someone get a feel for what we're about and benefit from some of that free content first before even worrying about diving into a program. So that would be the best place to find me. And that's where I hang out the most and more than happy to answer any questions or messages that come through.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much for all your time and sharing all your advanced wisdom with us. We really appreciate it. And I would encourage people to go check out your stuff. Thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dr. Mike.
Thank you very much to Sam for the great conversation today. Make sure to go to his website, his Instagram, and check out everything he has to offer. He's got some great stuff on his podcast and his newsletter. We've got all the links below, so make sure you go give him some love. Tell him I said hi. Check him out. If you're interested in being in the Phys Flex certification, opens again early September 2022. Go to physiologicflexibility.com. If it's not quite open yet, you'll see a waitlist form. Put your name and email in there, and you'll be notified of all the information. When it's open, that same link will take you to the sales page where you can get all the information. If you have any questions on it, you can contact me. I will get back to you. If you're looking for ways to go more in depth, but you're not really sure what direction to go, as we talked about in this podcast, blood testing is a great way to go. And for training, my bias is training the four main pillars to regulate your homeostasis or your baseline. The main four are going to be temperature, pH, fuel systems, and then breathing. If you get really good at all of those, which doesn't take a whole lot of extra effort, you're going to be much more resilient and harder to kill, in addition to be able to recover in record time. Also, my biased opinion is this is affording you more true longevity. We cover everything from different breathing techniques. We talk a lot about ketones and when it may be appropriate to do a longer ketogenic stint. Again, sometimes you want to run the backup system, which I believe is a ketogenic-based diet. But we also talk about the other end, carbohydrates, how to use them for performance, pH changes. I've got a whole lecture on lactate and maybe some supplement ideas you've never heard of before. And again, any questions, hit me up. Go to physiologicflexibility.com for all the information. Huge thanks again to Sam Miller for taking his time to come on the podcast and share all of his knowledge with us. Encourage you to check all of his stuff out. We love reviews of all kinds, so please post one up below, or if you're cramped for time, leave us whatever stars you think is appropriate. We enjoy any and all feedback. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. As always, it is greatly appreciated, and we will talk to you next week.
I have a good mind to go home.
You had a good mind, you wouldn't be here in the first place.